Hello and welcome to African Discourse here on Independent Television. I'm Uyag Mofwebe, live in Benin City, Nigeria. This week on the program, I want to look at Africa through the lens of leadership, especially as it has to do with democracy. On the continent, there have been arguments back and forth as to whether or not democracy is the style of leadership that will take Africa from this level to a much better one. Of course, a number of countries on the continent pride themselves in saying that they have adopted and domesticated the American quote-unquote brand of democracy, whether it's presidential or parliamentary. But the question is, to what extent are the core attributes, or if you like, elements of democracy as being practiced in the United States and other parts within the global West, all right, have been made visible on the continent, from Nigeria to Ghana to South Africa to Egypt and Morocco, for example. What kind of democracy do we find, for instance? In what ways have African leaders, particularly those who call the shots over the so-called democratic nations on the continent, shown leadership in such a way that you see progressive thinking in the way that they lead their people? Let's talk about elections for a second. See how elections are conducted on the continent. Every election cycle just whips up a range of controversies to the point that on the global stage, the ranking of Africa is very far from impressive. Every time there's an election on this continent, whether it's in Nigeria, in Ghana, or South Africa, for the most part, you're going to hear things like how that there was no level playing field and question marks over credibility or otherwise of the process. But the question is, can Africa see progress in these states? What must Africa do? In what ways can the continent and our leaders think out of the box? Somebody said the leaders in Africa will have to think as though there were no box. Otherwise, it's just going to be, for want of better words, a circus, of course, of fruitlessness. But then, on the show today, we want to look at all of these elements and then help create perspectives in the course of the show. My guest today is no other person than Christopher Ojekere. He's a public affairs analyst. In the middle of the show, hopefully, we'll be joined by Bishop Austin Igbasa to also weigh into the matter and then just lend his voice to the conversation. Christopher, it's a great pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
I know you're very passionate about not just issues around Nigeria, but Africa as a whole, because on some level, Nigeria is more like a pivot for the continent. Let's talk about what democracy has been like on the continent, vis-a-vis the same U.S., for example, from where we said we borrowed this kind of style of democracy that we're practicing on the continent.
I don't think the narrative has been beautiful. I think even the African continent itself is not proud of its practice of governance, which, for want of better word, we would now call democracy. For the most part, we don't seem to have made up our mind whether to continue with our patriarchal monarchical system of government or whether to transit into democracy. But we have no choice. We have no choice because of the elements of modernity that has hit Africa, elements of modernity that have developed other parts of the world and which have hit Africa. For instance, Africa have got Western education, and the Western education has exposed us to civil rights, civil liberties, has exposed us to the importance of the rule of law, has exposed us to the importance of institutional building and all of that. You have a huge population of Africa in diaspora as we speak, and a bigger population back home in Africa like you and I, who understands how these tenets work. So African governments and African rulers have no choice but to key in to the system of government that has worked for the rest of the world, that have protected civility and have been responsible for economic well-being and organized society, which is what we call democracy. We have no choice than to adopt that. The monarchical system and traditional monarchical system we had can no longer work in Africa. It didn't produce any form of development in the past. It only kept the society together when society was still very small and it was still very, very pastoral. and it was still it was in its elementary stages of development, then we could have those monarchical governments. But right now, we must transit into democracy. So what we have had mostly have been what you may refer to as civilian government, which themselves or itself has been so poorly managed. It is very difficult for you to point to any African country and say the true tenets of democracy with respect to institutional building, with respect to the defense of civil liberties and human rights, with respect to the freedom of the press, with respect to the respect for the rule of law, and then with respect to transparent, fair elections. It's very difficult for you to point to any African country to say this country has done well in these areas. But we have had those who have done well in maintaining stability in civilian governance, which now has given a semblance of democracy. You have countries
semblance,
like, it's a semblance of democracy. You have countries like Ghana, for instance, like Kenya, like Sierra Leone, and that have given a semblance of democracy. And we say that because they have had successive changes of government with respect to their constitutional provision, mostly of maintaining 2 terms of any president's tenure before you do another round of election to bring in a new president. Of course, you do elections after 4 years, but you have 2 terms tenure. Now, these countries I've just mentioned, Kenya, Ghana, Sierra Leone, and the Republic of Benin, have kept on to this tradition. So you can say they have given us a semblance of democracy. But with many other African countries, the story is very different. If you go to countries like Burundi, for instance, where Pierre Nkurunziza, I think that's the name, you know, had to change entirely. He called for a referendum and change the constitution so as to change the 2 tenureship because he wanted to elongate his stay in office. If you go to countries like Congo, where Sassou Nguesso did the same thing. Yeah, even Gambia here, Yahya Jammeh, after he lost an election, he refused to leave. It took AU, you know, some force of coercion, you know, from the continent
to show him the exits,
to push him out. What happened in Burkina Faso? What's the name? Campore lost the election, but he didn't want to go. The people had to push him out by force, and he flew to exile. So you have cases like that in almost every country. Now, even where you do not have that kind of case, like in Nigeria, for instance. Now, how well are we practicing democracy with regard to the tenets I named earlier? If you have a president of a country who continually flouts the rule of law,
which is sworn to defend,
continually assaults the constitution, which is sworn to defend, and then pays no attention to human rights, pays no attention to civic rights and human and civil liberties. Now, are you going to say that that's democracy? That's certainly not democracy. If you have a president who has a federal character entrenched in the constitution, that he swore to defend, that in the distribution of political offices, the entire country must be seen to be represented so there will be peace and stability. And you have that president, you know, going the way of cronyism, going the way of ethnocentrism, and then he's now appointing only people from his own region or people from his own ethnic group. These are all assaults on democracy. How free have elections been in these African countries? Now, elections are the tools that determine that if you have a particular government that is not performing well, it is the tool that is in the hands of the populace. It is the weapon within the legal limits of the populace to be able to change that government. So elections are critical to democracy, because if you don't have, you know, good elections, so to speak, if you don't have elections that are free, that are credible, that are fair, and that are transparent, we are definitely going to have crisis situations in the country. Go to Cameroon, for instance. Paul Biya, who's been there for God knows how long, wants to continue as life president. Now, if you go to Cameroon, southern Cameroon, as we speak now, is almost a republic of its own. In fact, the national government has lost southern Cameroon, so to speak, because they no longer take orders, instructions from the national government. They take instructions from the leaders of southern Cameroon. Just our neighbor here.
Isn't that a crisis situation already?
It's a crisis situation created by the desire for the government to force itself in power. Now, after 32 years, There is an election to be done, and you say the people want you back. The people you say want you back are protesting on the streets that they do not want you, and you say the people want you. When did the people say they wanted you back? So these are the kind of things you find from country to country, and it's been a sorry mess in the entire continent of Africa. In fact, according to the last report done by the African Center for Strategic Studies, not less than 13 African nations with full proof of how they have tried to either change their constitutions or done things to weaken the constitution and weaken the institutions of change, institutions of elections, so that you don't have elections in their country. Not less than 13 African countries. So if you have that kind of situations from country to country, you cannot say that you have a proper narrative for democracy.
Let's talk about process.
Yes.
Even though I know you have
Yes.
mentioned that in passing. But they say garbage in, garbage out in
Yes.
computer science, right? So you can't have better outcome than the quality of the process that throws up people. Across Africa, controversies mar the process that throws up leaders, whether it's in Nigeria or wherever else across the continent. How do we fix that process? Because it's fundamental to the conversation.
Now, that's a big problem. First, do we have enough politically active people from the elitist class in African countries? We do not have. Now, do we have parties that are developed and pursuing ideologies? We do not have. Do you have a populace that is educated and critical in thinking, especially political thinking? We do not have. And that is why you find that these few people who have taken over the space can manipulate the process over and over again. Because democracy has so, recreated itself to give power to the people and not to the government. And that is seen in civilized countries, where the people, if they don't want a government, do everything within the law to make sure that that government doesn't stand. But where you have a situation where the people have rejected democracy, how many voters turnout do we have in Nigeria if we are doing elections? You cannot sit down in your house and begin to complain about government, and you refuse to get voters' education, you refuse to get politically involved and politically active and politically educated to come out and use your force as the masses and use your population as the voters to change governments that you do not want, unpopular governments with unpopular policies. If you do not do that, there is no other magic to fix it, because democracy is structured in such a way that the power resides in you. But what we need to do, we need people like the civil society groups to begin to give voters education. That is also one of the work of electoral bodies like INEC you have in Nigeria, to give voters education to African population about their civic rights, the tenets of democracy, political education, so that when the people are enlightened and aware enough, the people will now decide how governance is structured, how governance is run, and when governance should change and when governments should change. This we do not have. So people are looking for solutions outside of this. It's not there. You don't have organized political institutions. If you don't have organized political institutions, you're not going to have internal democracy to start with. If you don't have internal democracy within the party to even bring forward the best within the party, how are you going to not have the best in the country, the best in governance? You're not going to have that. We have left the political parties to charlatans. We've left it to people who understand power and who understand that they have to manipulate power and want to rule over the rest of us. As they say, the worst of us rules over the rest of us. So we have left them. Now, enlighten people, and that's why I cited the case of Republic of Benin, not Republic, Republic of Benin here. If you follow the last few elections of Republic of Benin, especially the very last one conducted by, Yaya, now you will find that because the system has been a bit stable, a lot of private sector people, intelligentsias, people they had in diaspora had gone to school and were schooled and versed in the dynamics of politics, started coming to their politics. And in fact, the last competition had about 5 international players competing for presidency in that country. The reason for that is because you have had a fairly stable, change of elections. Now, if the political party, the government of the day allowed that, in fact, the government of the day nominated its own deputy as one of the presidential candidates. But you don't have that kind of thing replicated in other African countries. So you just leave it to those who manipulate the process, throw up who they want to throw up. And whether you like it or not, they go there and become your president. And they are ruling you. So Africa, you can't take away that education, that political education, enlightenment and participation on the part of the civic society for us to be able to achieve any meaningful
Let's
change.
talk about dictatorship.
Yes.
Of course, we can't pretend not to know that has been, some people say, the bane of development in Africa. I mean, you find somebody who comes to office, he does the first 4 years, does the second 4 years, and then right in the middle of the second term, decides to, as it were, alter the constitution using whatever method is in the books, just to ensure that the constitution is altered in such a way that he can stay in office for as long as he wants to. In some cases, he doesn't even mind dying while in office. The whole idea is to stay in office for the foreseeable future. How can Africa win, if you like, the war against the dictatorship? Because for the global West, it is one of the things that make Africa as a continent barbaric. Because let's say, how do you want to stay in office for 25, 30, 40 years? I mean, what did you leave in that office you want to take out by all means? Can you not stay there for 2 terms, leave and allow someone else come in with fresh ideas, and so on and so forth? Is there any hope in sight in terms of being able to surmount the problem of dictatorship?
You know, when you want to solve a problem, it's always better to give it a historical perspective.
Of course.
And in fact, in this particular case, a cultural perspective. We have a big problem in the sense that our traditional society was patriarchal, and then it was monarchical. So we don't seem, it appears it's in our DNA. The leaders see political positions as an inheritance. They see it as a right they are entitled to. And so when they are there, it is that patriarchal mentality, that monarchical mentality that they, and that's why we call them rulers and not governors. Now and they feel until they die, they shouldn't live there because they have not exhausted their reign. And while they are thinking of dying, they are preparing the prince, who is coming to sit down on their stool. That's the thinking. And it's in DNA. Now, what you would expect, and that's the disappointment at the elite class, you would expect that the elite would be, we have a bit of shifts in their mentality from this kind of primordial mentality. But it's always something that we cannot explain. How that elites come into government, and some of the elites are even worse in the way they react and in the way they respond to governance, procedures and institutions. So it also calls to question our education. We are beginning to now wonder whether what we are just giving is certification. Because at the heart of education is the education of the heart.
Right.
If the heart has not been educated to be transformed to liberal thinking, how does such person practice democracy? If you think that it's an entitlement for you to have a political position, instead of seeing it as a position of service, where you are supposed to render what you think you have as service to the people and then create a model for others to come and emulate and then maybe surpass. And that's how other societies are running. And we see other societies running along those lines. So what's wrong with us? It's in the DNA. So how that will be solved, I don't know, because it is something that is deeply entrenched in the mentality of Africa. How do you know that? Why is it commonplace in African countries? In almost every African country, except in places where you have such a heterogeneous society like Nigeria, where it is, a lot of other connotations come in, like the religion, like the tribe and all of that, it is difficult for you to really practice that, and that's why Obasanjo failed. But to think that Obasanjo, with all his education, could even think of third term. So that tells you that it's a big problem. So I still think the only way to go is for people to get true education. These things are holistic, and they are cyclical. They affect each other. It's for people. It's for us as the elites to push for proper education, so that people get enlightenment. And it doesn't have to be school enlightenment alone. If we have enough political education, and that's why I support the theory that if you want to entrench democracy in Africa, you must translate most of these things we are saying to local languages. Why do you think the Fulani as a group has that hegemonic tendency in Africa, in Nigeria, in fact in the whole of Africa? Because the average Fulani man with his radio in the forest is more politically conscious than most of our professors at the university. Everything that is done that affects their life and affects every other thing, politics, he's listening to in the forest with his transistor radio. And that's because it is said in the Fulani language and in the Hausa language which he understands. Do you have such thing going on in the South? You have people, Southern educated people talking very politically ignorantly. And you begin to wonder. So until there's that political education, which must be a deliberate process, It is no longer going to be left to a happenstance. It must be a deliberate process, and institutions must get involved in it. That is the only way you can now begin to have this kind of mental transition.
I'm sure
yes.
you're not done.
Yes.
I'm going to push this a bit further, but quickly, let's take a break now. We're back shortly to expand the conversation. Stay with us. Stay with us, everyone. We've just been joined by Bishop Austin Igbasan, public affairs commentator, to also weigh in on this discussion. Thank you so much, Bishop, for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Just before you came, I was talking with Christopher Jekiri here. We're just at the twilight of wrapping up on dictatorship in Africa. It will appear African leaders, if you like, rule, all right, with a disconnected thinking from the global stage. Because the world, we're told, is not a global village. But from the way we provide leadership on this continent, it will appear we do not, for whatever reason, appreciate the fact that the world is now globalized, I mean, in practical sense of the word. And then, on the other hand, you're also wondering, when African leaders attend international events, like, say, the United Nations General Assembly, what do they bring back home? I mean, on account of the interactions, the back and forth that they would have had with their counterparts from other parts of the world, from one continent to another. Does Africa look like a serious continent?
I feel that I used to describe Africa as a child of a rich man that is a spoiled child. The rich man make everything available for his son, but the son is not a thinking type. He's thinking instead of thinking. When people stop thinking, they start stinking. And when they start thinking, they go sinking. When a man stops to think, he will begin to stink. And when he begins to stink, he begins to sink. That is that is how I can describe Africa. There is no continent that is as blessed as Africa. But one major part that we are not blessed with is leadership. We didn't have it. And you see, most people got into power accidentally. You see people who will tell you that they are prepared 20 years, 12 years to be a leader. And by the time they assume leadership, you see them being babysitted, being breastfeeded, as if they were not prepared. Now you see the mindset of African leaders are very, very myopic. And that is why you see somebody who sit in a position and because of himself decide to change the constitution of his own country. Now to favor him, as if after him the country cannot exist without him, and there are no successor who can be able to go on and bring fresh idea. No man is an island, but we have African leaders who see themselves as island. And most African leaders don't believe in institution. They believe that they themselves, they are the institution. Their people must fear them. They must not fear institution. Most of them didn't want to leave a legacy of having a solid institution that will, after them, continue to bring forth leaders that will be a blessing and will not be a ruler. Most of our leaders, they are rulers. And look at their age. And look at, in Africa, you see old people ruling. And they don't even believe that the younger ones have a role to play. They don't believe that there are other people that they can contribute to the system. You see, everybody, as far as African leaders are concerned, you see, if their judiciary bow to the leader, legislator bow to the leader, executive bow to the leader, they don't bow to the constitution that birthed the nation. So you see that a judge is afraid to give a judgment that will be against a state governor or be in the interest of a sitting president, not even looking at his own job is to go by the rule and the constitution that established the nation. So they see African leaders are rulers. They rule, they dictate. So that's why you see an African leader can hate you now, look at you and say, "Uyi, I don't like your beard." And because of your beard, that will be the beginning of he begin to chase you because of your beard. Now you must submit to him. No, most of them don't believe that there's continuity. They don't. You see, somebody will tell you about a system. You met a system rotting, And as a leader, a sincere leader, you must be able to inject what will sanitize the system, that even after you have gone, you will see that the system will keep producing genuine leaders that will be a blessing to the people. I'll give you an example of leaders in Africa that sign a bill, and they will tell you that this bill I'm signing is not going to affect me. You see African leaders who decide not to sign a bill into law that has been legislated and money has been spent, taxpayer money of their country has been wasted in public hearing. People fly in from different places, they stay in hotel, they bring their input. You see a sitting African leader will decide and say, if I sign, I give my assent to this particular law, it will hamper my own mindset. It will not, I will not benefit from it. Now, because of it, I need to make sure that my assent that is so powerful to that particular act that's supposed to make the nation a better nation, I will withdraw my assent. I will go back on a merry-go-round again and start wasting the public fund again to go and repackage that same bill to be represented again. You cannot see the mindset of African leaders. You see, we talk of electoral process in Africa. How do we arrive there? How do we get our leaders? Now, how many of the leaders have come on board and said, I want to make sure I sanitize this system, that the man coming after me, during my time, things will be transparent enough that we will copy nations. And with all sense of responsibility, I feel that African leaders have no reason of joining their counterpart in the Western world, because they are wasting our money going to those meetings, read speeches that are full of lies and there are no facts on ground. They will bring a cosmetic, a kind of cosmetic speech in an environment where everybody will clap, and the white men themselves, they are not on ground to be able to know exactly if the man that is standing on stage is saying the truth. It's painful enough that African leaders are led by elderly people who did not have a legacy for the younger one, that we cannot copy their lifestyle. You see elderly men who are in leadership telling lies, bogus lies, that younger generation knew that this is lie. You see elderly people who are in position of leadership and they want to make sure their faith rules their nation, not the constitution. Elderly people that rule nations, and they believe they don't believe in merit. They believe in, oh, where is the tribe you came from? Where is the ethnic part of the nation I rule that you came from? Now, there are leaders today that they keep people in position even when they are incapacitated and they don't have anything to offer. You have leaders in Africa who believe that my brother from my local government will continue to falsify his age so that he will not get to his retirement age, and other people who are career officers under them will be, their progress will be hampered because one man decided to say, this is the way I want to go. I feel that African leaders have so much power that after Almighty God and witches and wizards, they are the number 3 in position of power. And we need to, if we are going to make Africa great, we must whittle down in the power. We're using every instrument of law to whittle down the power of African head of state or African presidents.
I'm going to ask you a follow-up question now. You said a while ago that Africa is blessed, I mean significantly blessed in terms of both human and natural resources. I mean, there are no two ways to that. But the question is, hasn't there been gross mismanagement of these resources? I mean, in Africa you have diamonds, in Africa you have gold, in Africa you have, of course, the black gold, which is the crude oil. You have all forms of resources. Of course, Africa is blessed in terms of agriculture, starting from Nigeria, for example. Then you go to other countries, you go to countries like, say, the Netherlands, where they have oil in the ground, yet they would rather do agriculture and then leverage tax just to be able to drive the economy. And people will tell you, look, the Netherlands as a country is not even as big, or at least it's not bigger than Niger State in Nigeria. Yeah. What exactly must we do as a continent, country by country, to plug all of these holes that we have?
I think that the organs that bring African leaders together, I think there must be a kind of mindset revolution. And I think that African leaders, we must begin to set up a mechanism in place wherein we will not have old people being head of states in Africa. Old people. You see head of states today who cannot own iPad, and they are president of their nation. In
2021.
Yes. That they cannot own an iPad. There are presidents in Africa today that if you leave them without their protocol and you give them an iPad to own it and also go on Google, they will need the Holy Spirit to help them or did the whole world to help them do that? When such men are in position of leadership, and in a world that is technologically driven, how can such people be a blessing to their nation? Now, we must have a kind of, what I think is that African young people must be able to wake up, like what we have in EndSARS in Nigeria. They must be able to wake up rather than doing something that does not have future. That we are looking at, what do I do and get money quick? We have gotten to that level that African young men today, they saw that even the leadership does not reward wisdom, knowledge, and hard work. I give you an example. We just have Big Brother Nigeria, and the person that won came out with so much of money. I remember somebody got a particular point in University of Lagos that nobody has ever gotten. He's from Ekiti State or Diariba. I think the governor then gave him a laptop. That was the blessing. That was how to appreciate a young man that broke a record. That we're supposed to say, what do we do for this? Is he going to be a special advisor to the governor? Is he going on youth affairs? This area he has done so well. What do we do to make people know that we reward hard work? But because our leaders in Africa, you see, you cannot give what you don't have.
So you are saying our priorities are misplaced?
Yes, we have misplaced priority. Now, people sat down in a particular house. The same government in Africa who said you cannot preach on television and said a blind man opened his eye. The same government saw people wearing G-string, nakedly, people having sex. How do we arrive here in Africa? That's not our culture. How do we arrive here that even the broadcasting commission who are legislated to monitor what goes on, the content of what is shown on television, see nothing wrong with all what we are seeing?
But again, the fact is, Bishop Igbasan, the National Broadcasting Commission does not regulate
satellite
stations.
When I say we are talking of Africa, I'm not talking of
on
Nigeria.
The continental level.
Yes, that's why I tell you, say Broadcasting Commission. That's why I didn't put Nigeria.
Okay,
because
so it's not limited to Nigeria.
Yes, now it's like you are talking of NAFDAC, it's limited to Nigeria. Yes. But when you say those the policy control on food and drugs, you are talking of general term. Now I say that African leader who knew that our culture is not that we walk on the street naked, we don't sleep with ourselves naked, we don't sleep with dog, we don't sleep with animal. How do we arrive here that if we are morally upright and our leadership in Africa, must we applaud this thing that happened wherein merit is left and we are not becoming mediocrity? We celebrate mediocrity instead of merit. Wherein people felt that if I can get 90 million and travel to Dubai and have this one and people give me endorsement here and there, why am I being endorsed? Because I've raised a generation of children at home who are now having a biased mindset and their mental picture about life. Their moral life is being corrupted by my action in a house. Have you seen people being gathered in the house and talking about research where the money is made available to the best science students? We put them in one place and we make money available for them. Let them begin to research on how do we cure malaria, how do we do COVID-19, even at our level in Nigeria. All our virologists, what has our country done as a nation? By bringing those professors together, make money available for them instead of waiting for one vaccine that is coming from nowhere country. That we are able to look inward and not. You see, we have beggar leaders who have a beggar's mindset that they must beg for everything, even including the air they breathe in. They beg for everything. We have leaders today who have misplaced priority. We have nations where they're having war today, that they have war planes that are sitting down in one place with air condition. One plane that's supposed to be sorting out security issues in different places is being kept in a place. How do you explain that one? Where somebody wear a particular cloth and the person is being arrested, and other people wear army uniform with army equipment, and they're taking pictures with the chief executive of a state, and nobody arrests them, and the man on the street wear one particular color, and the man is being molested somewhere. How do you explain that one in a sane African society? Now, how do you explain when people supposed to be on their sick bed at home are now in position of leadership and they became a liability to the nation they govern? People that are having amnesia, people that cannot remember their native day, people that can give appointment to those who have died for years, and they give appointment to them and they issued a letter of appointment for those who are long buried.
And yet, in a nation where we have the best brain, today by the grace of God, Edo State have the World Medical Association president. He's a pride to us. The guy who designed the American drone is from Edo State here. We have great people in Africa. Even in Nigeria, we go to UK, you see the best doctor. Go to America, you see the best doctor. But what is wrong with us is that we have leaders that are rulers and they don't have anything to offer. They got to power by hook and crook, and when they get there, they make sure that they wedge themselves, and they are not a blessing to Africa, but they make sure that the resources we have become a cost to us as a nation.
Okay,
and we cannot continue like this until the young man wakes up. Let the young men wake up. We woke up during the NSAS before it was hijacked by leaders who felt that what they are doing is wrong. The young men, they organized themselves. They sat down, they fed themselves. Nobody was talking about religion in that place. Nobody was talking of ethnicity. They chant the same song. They have Juno prayer. They have Sunday service. Until the leaders who felt that if they continue like this, just like God scattered the tongue of men when they came in unity, these young boys and girls are waking up to stay in the street and said, we want our country to change. We are one. They decided not to go by nepotic mindset of leaders and bigotries. They decided to say, let us forge ahead. With what happened in the NSAS in Nigeria as a sign to all Africa, it means that we have great youth in our nation. That if they didn't allow this elderly old brigade to infiltrate their system, they can give us a better nation. There was no environmental sanitation was done where they were all seated in unity. Nobody complained. Like I was the one that swept the ground yesterday. You didn't see anywhere litter. Everything was done well because these guys, they organize themselves. It shows us that we have great men in our youth who can be better leaders. Look at what we're having and the tribunal we're having. Look at a young girl who came with recorded everything documented. Even when the Nigerian army is denied that they were not there, look at what that girl brought out. You will be inspired at home that if a young girl can have a detailed recording of proceeding that a sitting government is denied, that shows us that when these young people are encouraged and we don't allow our politicians to give money to them to turn them against themselves, if they can be united, it's better we have youth as our presidents in Africa. We are tired of old brigades.
But Bishop Igbasa, we're going to talk about the young people and of course role modeling as we tie it up in a bit. But let me talk to Christopher here. There are those who still say, look, former colonial masters, whether they are the British people, the French authorities, still have their hold, strong grip on several African countries, including the most influential amongst the African nations. Then they say that is also a variable in this equation of African conversation and so on and so forth. How much of truth do we have in that?
I think those colonial masters are cashing on our vulnerability to blackmail Africa and to blackmail African leadership. It's deeper than people realize. The truth of the matter is that I can't give you specific figures now, but researches have been done to show the involvement of colonial masters in the deaths and overthrow of many progressive African leaders. I mean, Thomas Sankara is an example.
Of course, which is trending again now.
Even John Magufuli of Tanzania, who stood his ground against what he thought was the COVID manipulation of Western imperialism to recolonize Nigeria by whatever, Africa by whatever means. I mean, shortly after his stand, he's late. I mean, you cannot take that away. There have been confessions by CIA agents about what they were asked to do in South Africa to spread AIDS, to control the population of Africa. There have been confessions by espionage retirees about how they interfere in nations in Africa and how they blackmail presidents to signing treaties and all of that. So it's a factor to deal with. But those factors exist because you can't think for yourself. Because, I mean, we had a president in this country remove the negative narrative of Abacha. But Abacha, in that negative narrative, you could discern a silver lining in his procedure. How was he able to keep the naira stable to 80 naira per dollar for 8 years? He had cut off from the global north and all those imperialist nations. He was the one that opened Nigeria's diplomatic export nation to China, because he sought other friends because of the blackmail. Now, when Jonathan was there, one of the subtle carrots that was dangled by America when Obama was there was for Jonathan to sign into lesbianism, which he refused. And I understand that Buhari told them point blank that that wasn't our culture. But if you watch the trend of our Nigerian government today, it seemed to take his signature of much of the things he does from this global north that he has rejected. Why are they keep giving him loans? Why they keep giving him money when they know that by their own researches they cannot account for the developmental pattern of how this money is spent? I work in the development world, and part of our development activities are run by foreign donations. Now, that's part of NGOs' work. Now, if they are going to give you any grants or any fund, it is tied to specifics. You deliver reports on point to point before another tranche of the money is released to you. And they have to be seen to agree with developmental patterns and templates that you had agreed on. What of these, what kind of template is Buhari submitted to international financial institutions that they keep giving him huge loans? Because the theory there is that if you load them enough with enough money
and overwhelm them,
they become lazy, and the money becomes a problem to them. They become consumptive and not productive. And that's exactly what is happening. When China shut the Iron Curtain, China did that and retreated back into China. By the time that curtain was lifted, they are in competition with America today. If America can no longer boast over China, they now respect them. Now, which African leader have been able to do that? To say, let us shut up Nigeria. We have enough in Nigeria, for instance, to survive. And we have enough to bargain in the international community, whether trade, whether manpower resources. Think about it, mineral resources. Think about it. We have enough in Nigeria. We have specific God-given, world income-driven resources. We have steel. We have the black gold, which is still very current in existence. We have maritime. Then we have textile. Then we have iron and ore. That is not to mention all the other minerals that are on the ground. We have diamond, we have bauxite, and we have all of our magnesium. We have them in this country in huge quantities. Now, all of this is what Britain doesn't have half of this. What Britain just has is the human resources. So they organize their superior thinking. And then you are going to Britain to borrow money. Britain is not as rich as you. Your riches is in your raw material. But the raw material does not become riches until they are finished. So what you need to do is to make bargain with what you have to get what you need. We are not doing that. So there is something fundamentally wrong. And that is why we say we must have a system, as he was trying to emphasize, where thinkers will find themselves. Thinkers are patriots will find themselves. I may not perfectly concede to the age theory, because take it, the last president of America was 70-something years. The president was older than him. And they are running the largest country in the world. So I think I agree with him on the intellectual theory. Exposure to education, exposure to critical thinking, and exposure to patriotic and democratic tenets. You know, that's the training you give to leaders who now have that ability to be able to now organize the resources within this country to bargain. So if Abacha, who did not go far in education, could do what he did, now when some people like Obasanjo when he was there, who is highly educated and exposed, and the man who is there now who was given even a recommendation from an American military school about what he could do, and in fact I remember that recommendation said that people like this should be allowed to lead the country. What is happening to him? He is a far cry from what we read in that recommendation letter as we speak now. So the problem, we cannot understand it. But what we know is that Nigeria, to take the case of Nigeria, and I understand it's the same with many other African countries, have a huge diaspora population that are excelling in different fields. He just mentioned Osemigwe, who makes drones for America. He mentioned the Brainest family in Britain, the Mafidons. They call them the Brainest family in Britain. We're talking of about 3 Nigerians in the government of Obama. And I mean, they got there by merit. We're talking about all other fields where Nigerians, now go and read the statistics. It was done by an American research group that the most stable families, when you talk of population average, the most stable family and the most educated in America are Nigerians.
Yes.
If you take population average, that the most stable, that have marital stability, and the most educated are Nigerians. I mean, there's no gainsaying it all over the world now. So the point is, if you have such a population doing well outside, then something's not wrong with our brain. Something's wrong with our system. So what we have is a systemic problem. And that systemic problem is organized. You need an organized solution. That is to be done outside of government. It is to be done outside of government by Nigerians. And then you penetrate that government. And you're able to do some revolution. When we had great hopes in people like Fashola, who came in there, and Fashola showed good flashes of progressive governance. And we thought, oh, a model has started. In fact, across party, Fashola was praised. The APC saw him as their poster boy, and indeed it was. I mean, some of the reforms and some of the policies he put in place is still what is running Lagos today. LATSMA, which all other states are copying. Are you following? Urbanization, which all other states are copying. Dealing with area boys and so, which all other states are copying. And IGRO drive and all of that. It was Fashola who put all of that in place. Now, what did other governors do? They took the model, used it to get popularity. When they come to power, they are hypocrites. They are doing differently. We cannot get landmark achievements by terms of policies to say, okay, these are things that will run after this governor leaves. Are you following me? So the point we are making is that there has to be an organized, you can't leave it to individual. The system will also corrupt that individual to capture the individual and recreate the individual. It has to be an organized solution from outside to say this system cannot work. Now, I believe very strongly that if we divide Nigeria, by divide I mean if we restructure Nigeria into smaller units of administration, we are going to be closer to the solution than we are now. I find it very ludicrous that the federal government is making educational policies for Edo State, for instance. The federal government does not understand, whoever is the federal government, does not understand how Edo people think. They don't understand our traditional Edo enlightenment from the Portuguese. The first graduate produced in this country was an Edo man. Nigeria, Edo State was the first country to send out an ambassador to Lisbon in 16-something. The trajectory and the value of education we had in Edo State that is still standing us out today, they don't understand it. And you are making redundant policy and reducing the standards of advancement to say JAMB cutoff mark is now reduced. If Edo State was allowed to run from Ugbomudia, JAMB cutoff mark in Edo today would be 300 and above. If Edo State was allowed to develop, so we cannot run away from restructuring this country.
Yes. I think this is why I'm going to just allow you to step on your brakes. But in 1 minute, Bishop Igbosan, let's talk about young people coming up right now, because whether you like it or not, there has to be a disconnect between where we are today and where we should be heading going forward. We have young people across this continent, brilliant, whether in banking and finance, in oil and gas, in tech, in sports, whatever it is. I mean, even in the media, for example. How do we ensure that there's a shift in the thinking, and then, of course, the paradigm is drastically shifted for the better?
I think the old brigade, they never want the youth to come up. I give you an example. How many governors today in Nigeria that can boast of 40 or 30% of their appointment given to young men? And even those who give to young men, which type of young people do they give it to? Is it the area bodyguards and area boys who are empty-headed? Now, these are areas where the youth, I think the youth must come together. We must, just like my brother has said now, what is going to happen is going to happen outside the government.
Don't forget that Nadeco was not part of military government. It was from the outside that people like late Ndubuisi, Kanu, and the rest of them, the Nadeco leaders, Ajashin, or Blessed Memory, or Nabanjo, the rest of them, they came back, and they, despite there was military dictatorship there, they were building up a force that they were galvanizing their voices together and putting the government on its heel. I think the youth today, the government will not come and wake them up. They need to wake up by themselves and begin to build up groups where they will be able to take people in leadership. They will take them by their words. Because you see example of people we champion our head for, and we thought they are going to turn things around. At the end of the day, what have they done? They've ended up making sure that they use the system, and they are doing worse than people we revolted against. Now that shows you that this is a systemic decay that we must, the youth, I want the youth to wake up now. You see people today who we thought they are technocrats, they came on board and became worse than people who are political illiterate, who were in power. Now they rule like emperor. They rule by, they can command and tell you where you're going to sleep now, by the order of being in position of election, where they were elected into. People today who are in leadership, who we felt supposed to wake up the youth need to wake up. Just the same way Nadeco did not wait for military government to call them and come and galvanize them together. I think the youth should be coming up, and they should look beyond whatever is temporal that is going to make people to applaud for them. They should look beyond what is temporal. Let the youth themselves, we are setting up an organ where we begin to appreciate youth who have done well in media, in other. You see, when Agamaliza jump from up, he will not decide, say, if nobody clap for me, let me clap for myself. The youth themselves need to come out of their cocoon and start building an alliance, setting up young people who said they want to become president. As soon as we finish 2019 election, all the young people were clapping for them, all of them went into their cocoon. When it is 3 weeks to election, you see them galvanizing, doing seminar.
So in essence, you're saying they should be visible, and be consistent in pushing the narrative. Yes, thank you so much, Bishop Austin Inubasan. We also would love to appreciate Christopher Jekiri, two gentlemen, for coming to show brilliance on this conversation today. This is what we're living in time. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Our coverage on ITV continues.